For more on how space entrepreneurship is taking off, I'm joined by Ryan Faith, Defense and National Security Editor at Vice News. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, what would you say are some of the main drivers that are helping expand the space market?
Well, right now, the really big driver is communications, GPS, things that are very sort of IT related. The challenge is going from that to the sort of the next generation, which is basically to figure out other ways to make money in space.
And would you say that the market could potentially get much bigger with those developments?
Oh, absolutely. Right now, the global space market is about $315 billion, according to the Space Report, just put up by the Space Foundation Industry Group. But the long-term open end on it is just enormous because there's not really a good way to sort of say, how large it could get in the long term, at least.
Now, some people have compared it to how the auto market has changed over the last several decades with a lot of offshoots forming. Would you say there's some similarities there?
I'd say actually probably the better analogy is Christopher Columbus crossing the ocean, because you're basically looking at whole new terrains, new industries, all kinds of stuff. So it's going to be a lot longer term than the auto industry, but a lot larger top end than the auto industry.
And are there any particular offshoots or developments that you're excited about seeing?
Well, right now, the stuff that's happening now with Bitcoin, and somebody's talking about putting Bitcoin servers in space, and that has sort of an interesting development for what that might lead to. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with remote sensing, Earth observation, and ways that people are learning to leverage that data.
Now, that's interesting. Bitcoin obviously has had some controversy, so it's interesting that as we're going into space, that's something that they'd be tapping into.
Well, the Bitcoin angle is basically that most of the time the fact that it's hard to get into space is a negative in most applications. Bitcoin is using it to make very secure, very hard to hack servers, which are basically taking advantage of the difficulty in getting into space.
And as we look at some of the funding, there seems to be a lack of US government funding, which has opened the door for private businesses to get involved. Other than money, what is it that private businesses can bring to the table?
A lot of it really is sort of an innovation approach, is that folks like Elon Musk or Richard Branson have enough money to where they can sort of go in and decide that they're going to pursue this technology or that technology, and they can stake out a lot bolder course than you can get from either a government or really a traditional sort of shareholding public company.
And are there any particular companies that are at the forefront that are really pushing those boundaries?
Really is Elon Musk's SpaceX and Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic are really the two that are sort of really right out there at the front of this. And they're, I think, going to be doing a lot of very interesting technological stuff in the next 5 to 10 years.
Now, other than the commercial offshoot, there's also the purely scientific look. And what would you say are the countries that are really leading the way in terms of space exploration at the moment?
Well, right now, the internationally it's all done by governments, but each country seems to be sort of shaking out into a very specific niche area. China seems to be very interested in the moon. Japan's very focused on asteroids. Europe's doing a lot of work on comets. The US is doing a lot on Mars. So each of them sort of developing its own sort of specialty area.
Now, there's been a lot of comment that China's approach is more targeted, more focused. Is there any way that the US can shift its strategy to kind of keep pace with some of the growth we're seeing in other countries?
Well, I think it would be very difficult for the U.S. to be more targeted and more focused than China because their program is really, really well designed to do what it's intended to do. The U.S. spends more money than other nations do on space exploration, but it's pulled in a lot more directions.
And what would you like to see happen in order to help space exploration grow in the U.S.?
In the U.S. particularly, it's sort of the sense of mission right now is if their intent is to do the best science possible, that opens up to a million different questions and different planets to go to and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily as well scripted or as focused as a specific agenda to build infrastructure, to build outposts and so on and so forth.
And is there anything that you're seeing in the emerging markets in terms of the slowdown that would maybe affect how they're spending? Is that something they should be focusing on?
Well, for the most part, in emerging markets, actually, the one really interesting one is India. India is starting to leverage a lot of its space technology and going towards a more exploration orientation. But basically, countries are discovering that space spending is a very good way to build STEM education, get young people involved in math and science. And so watching how they're using their space programs to basically plant the seeds for long-term growth has been very, very fascinating.
Well, it's definitely something that we'll be watching. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ryan Faith from Vice News.